Hello everyone, and welcome to the channel. Europe's elites spent years talking about the strategic defeat of Russia. Yesterday, we watched something closer to the strategic disappearance of Europe itself from the actual decision-making loop. While Brussels is busy writing resolutions, Washington sends an envoy, Moscow sets the terms, and ordinary Europeans get the bill in the form of higher prices, higher risks, and a slow slide toward a much bigger war. The whole show took 7 minutes of Putin talking to cameras in a badly lit corridor. 7 minutes that did more damage to the European narrative than years of triumphant speeches in Strasbourg. And this is where the official story falls apart. Putin's message was simple and unpleasant. First, Russia is not afraid of a war with Europe and is technically ready to fight it here and now if Europe insists. Second, what Russia is doing in Ukraine he described as a surgical operation, not a full-scale war. Third, the attack on the tankers near Turkey is piracy and opens the door to very harsh countermeasures, from blockading Ukrainian ports to destroying anything that moves toward them. Now, you don't have to like Putin to see the structure. On one side, a nuclear power with its industry partially shifted to war footing, saying out loud it can escalate. On the other, a European Union that can't even buy enough shells on schedule, but keeps signaling that it wants to stand firm indefinitely. You see the problem here, right? Let's start with the physics. A continental-scale state that still controls its territory, industry, and energy has options in war. It can decide how much of the economy to militarize, which plants switch from nails and kitchenware to shells and cartridges, how much consumer comfort to sacrifice for guns. Russia has not gone into full war economy. It still produces civilian cars, appliances, food, all the usual things. But it has shown it can push certain sectors into higher gear when needed. In short, the system has spare capacity for escalation. Europe is in the opposite position. It already lives in a permanent emergency mode. Energy transition, sanctions, rearmament, social spending, everything at once, funded by more debt and higher taxes. The room for maneuver is shrinking. This is the part no politician wants to explain on TV, because it leads to a very simple question. If you are already stretched in peacetime, how exactly do you sustain a real continental war? Then we get to the tankers. 2 civilian ships, foreign flagged, heading empty toward Novorossiysk, hit near Turkey. The legal debate is boring. Exclusive economic zone, territorial waters, special zone, and so on. The practical outcome is not boring at all. You hit merchant shipping near a NATO country. You play with fire. It affects insurance, shipping routes, free prices, and, in the end, fuel costs for ordinary people. This number is the quiet part said out loud. Every extra risk premium at sea translates into euros and dollars on your receipt at the petrol station. Calling this piracy is not just rhetoric. Piracy is one of the few things the entire global system pretends to take seriously, because it attacks the blood circulation of world trade. If you normalize attacks on tankers in peacetime shipping lanes, you are quietly widening the war from land to sea. And this is where theory hits a brick wall. You cannot have limited conflict and safe global shipping at the same time. Now, here's the part that keeps economists and strategists awake at night. The same European capitals that scream about rules-based order are remarkably calm when their own side crosses into legally gray territory. Low-cost drones against pipelines, cables, tankers, ports. Nobody signs the attack. Everybody understands the message. Publicly, it's all heroic strikes on shadow fleets. Privately, it's the slow destruction of confidence in basic infrastructure. For a trade-dependent continent, that is suicide by small cuts. Let's move to the second layer, players and incentives. The American envoy in this case is there for a reason. Washington wants some kind of controlled end to this mess that doesn't look like obvious defeat before their own elections. Moscow wants written guarantees and recognition of facts on the ground. Both sides treat Europe as background noise, annoying, loud, but not decisive. If you work in foreign policy and this offends you, good. That means you're still in contact with reality. Europe, meanwhile, plays a strange game. It has no army of its own, no independent nuclear deterrent, no industrial base ready for long war. but insists on being the strictest in the room when it comes to peace terms. Every time there is a hint of negotiation, some bright head in Brussels or Tallinn adds conditions that any sober person in Moscow will reject on day one. Then, when talks stall, the script is ready. You see, Putin doesn't want peace. This is the structural flaw you can't fix with a press release. So let's take a breath. Where are we now? Years into the conflict, we have Russia signaling it is ready to fight Europe directly if needed. The US probing for a deal that saves face, and the EU blocking any realistic compromise while lacking the tools to win a long war. The one number nobody in Brussels likes to say out loud is very simple: zero. Zero coherent European peace proposals that Russia could even theoretically accept without national suicide. Here is that number, and here is why it matters. Because when you have zero realistic peace options on the table, the probability of a big war stops being abstract. It becomes the default. The system drifts there by inertia, especially when someone on one side starts saying openly, "If you think you're strong enough to fight, we're ready," and then adds the key difference. Ukraine is treated as brothers, Europe as just another rival power center. Translated into normal language, that means this: what you've seen in Ukraine so far is the gentle version. Now let's zoom in on the economic bloc, because this is where elite hypocrisy becomes almost funny. Putin's line is, "We are not on full war rails. We are still producing consumer goods, but we are tightening control over key enterprises. Drop in output? Unacceptable. Quality problems? Unacceptable. Import substitution frauds who solder Russian labels onto Chinese components? Also unacceptable." Behind the usual propaganda, there is a clear signal to Russian capital. Either you work for the state's strategic goals, or the state will work without you. Compare this to Europe. When energy prices exploded, when industry started to cut capacity, did anyone in Brussels talk seriously about quality of management, about disciplining failed elites, about taking back control over critical sectors? No. They blamed Russia, wrote another sanctions package, and announced a green leap forward that magically solves everything someday. If you're watching this from Germany, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Chemical plants quietly moving capacity elsewhere, while politicians talk about historic transformation. So let's take a breath again. Where does this leave us so far? On one side, we have a system which, whatever you think of it, is clearly willing to coordinate industry with military needs and adjust course on the fly. On the other side, we have a system that treats its industrial base as a disposable background for ideology. Promise versus physics. The West promised to bankrupt Russia. The physical reality looks more like deindustrialization at home. This is the part no European commissioner wants to admit, even to themselves. Now let's zoom out for a second. The domestic block of Putin's speech was not for the masses. It was for elites. The signal was straightforward. The situation inside Russia is controlled and predictable. There is no serious force capable of staging a palace coup or a color revolution right now. Translation: if you bet on chaos in Moscow to save you from your own mistakes, you are betting on a ghost. From here, all options are bad. The only question is who pays first. And this brings us to the hardest question for Europe. What is your project? The US project is clear, even if you dislike it. Maintain global primacy as long as possible. The Russian project, in their own words, is survival as a sovereign state and center of power. China has its own long industrial and geopolitical game. What is the European Union's project, beyond moral self-advertising and internal control? Nobody can explain it without using the word values 5 times in one sentence. That's not strategy. That's a marketing brochure. When you have no project, you outsource your security to others, your energy to others, your industrial inputs to others. And then you wake up in a war that you cannot end and cannot win. So you do what institutions always do under stress. You start lying to your own population because you have nothing else left. You tell them that we just need to hold on a bit longer, that Russia is on the verge of collapse, that sanctions are working while you quietly buy what you need through backdoors and middlemen. Here is where the story stops making sense. You say you want peace, but you systematically sabotage any realistic negotiation. You say you defend international law, but you applaud attacks that look a lot like terrorism to anyone outside your own bubble: tankers, pipelines, energy terminals. You say you are protecting European lives, while you slowly walk toward a scenario where European cities become direct targets instead of just spectators. Does this look like strategy from your corner of Europe, or just managed decline dressed as heroism? Now, consequences. This is where all the beautiful phrases turn into very boring numbers on household budgets. Hit tankers, pipelines, and export terminals, and you raise global risk and price for oil and gas. Raise energy costs, and you kill margins for European industry that already operates in a high-cost environment. Kill margins, and you get closures, layoffs, or relocation. Combine that with higher military spending, and you have a simple equation: less money for health, education, infrastructure, more money for weapons and subsidies to keep a few factories alive. If you're watching this from the Baltics or Poland, you are in an even nicer position. You pay more than the EU average for energy. You spend more than the EU average on defense. And you sit closer than the EU average to any potential front line. And your elites are usually the loudest in calling for escalation, while having the smallest economies and industrial bases to back it up. This number is what nobody in Vilnius, Riga, or Tallinn wants to put on a campaign poster. How many days their countries could function in a real big war without external help? Let's be blunt. If Europe continues to behave like this, blocking pragmatic peace, escalating symbolically, hollowing out its own economy, outsourcing real decisions to others, the probability of a large war on the continent does not go down with time. It goes up, step by step, attack by attack, sanctions package by sanctions package. You can call it deterrence, you can call it values, you can call it whatever helps you sleep at night. The structural logic remains the same. The meeting between Putin and Trump's envoy is just one snapshot in this process. It shows who is actually talking about endgames and who is still performing for their own media. It shows who is ready, at least in words, to fight Europe directly, and who is pretending that the war will stay forever, conveniently limited to Ukrainian territory and other people's tankers. And it shows exactly how replaceable European elites have become in the eyes of the bigger players. Loud enough to be annoying, weak enough to be ignored. So the core contradiction is very simple. Europe wanted to be the judge and architect of Russia's defeat. It ended up as a spectator while others decide how far this war goes and on what terms it stops. In that position, continuing to play with escalation and piracy in the name of freedom is not brave, it is stupid. And big wars, the really ugly ones, usually start with a long chain of stupid decisions presented as moral necessity. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones. And try to remember, slogans don't power grids, systems do.